Healing Path. I'm Laura Donnelly, founder of the Healing Path Conversation Series and Dancing with Ease Body Brain Balance. People hire me to teach them to move out of pain. And these conversations are conversations with friends who are working in all kinds of different areas of healing. The main thing that we have in common with each other is the idea and the belief that all healing begins with self-healing, and then it expands outward from there. So today, my beautiful guest, coming to us from her garden in England, is Lorraine Staton. I will bring her on to the broadcast and she can tell you a little bit about herself, and then we will just riff on gardening, healing, being in nature, and the metaphors that gardening has in common with how we work with our own being and our own souls. Here is Lorraine. Hi.
Hi, Laura.
I'm so
Hi.
happy to see you.
I don't know if this is working, but I'm getting double sound echo
Oh,
for you and for me.
interesting. I wonder. I'm not. I have echo cancellation on my machine settings.
Okay, we can do it, and I will try to ignore the second voice coming through.
Okay, and if the recording has two voices, we'll just meet again
Or
on
it'll be
another day.
a double whammy.
That's it, in more ways than one.
Okay, so my name is Lorraine Stanton, and I am and I have started a program called Growing with Grace. It's essentially my UK version of forest bathing, which is the Japanese beautiful expression that we are healed when we are in nature. And so I have a beautiful garden here, and I work from my garden, sharing the metaphors for life, whether it be the slug or the flowers or the rain that may appear while we're talking today, um, and using those as a way to facilitate the journey to the heart.
That's beautiful. The thing I love about the garden is you can't rush anything growing.
Indeed, it's all got its own flow, its own nature, and that's what's so perfect as a metaphor for us. You know, we are so often trying to rush our lives, trying to force ourselves into a certain shape. You know, we may be comparing ourselves with others, um, thinking that life needs to be a certain way, or we need to be a certain way in life at a certain time. It all should happen now. And nature flows in its own way, its own seasons, its own rhythm. Oak trees are oak trees, apple trees are apple trees, roses flower in the summer, snowdrops appear in the winter, and that's the way it is.
And I also think that depending on where someone lives, that they probably are in harmony with the seasons and the growing cycles where they are. My friend Marlene lives in South Africa, so she's having winter, and we have just been baking in the summer.
Mm.
And so I have been really kind of living in these two zones, because when I talk to her, I'm reminded that what is so familiar to me is actually opposite for her.
Mm. Mm.
And then when I lived in Arizona, the growing season really was like end of August into early April, which is very backwards for where I live now in Kansas, where we can grow into October carefully, but once winter happens, it's too cold for anything outdoors. And in Arizona, it's too hot in the summer. So I lived differently when I lived there than I do when I live here where I am now. So have you, I mean, and you're in the UK, and so we're both end of summer. So we have compatible things. But I also think the whole gestation period underground, the dark of winter, is a very, very healing and growing time. It's easy to think nothing's happening.
Sure. And you know, my work is called Growing with Grace. And I use metaphors from the garden, but it's not about gardening. It's about the gardening of our hearts. And you're right, there's a whole process that goes on during winter in those times where we may feel depressed, or we're between jobs or between relationships, or in the doldrums in some stage of our lives, which life goes like this. So when we're in those down times, there are still things happening, and maybe we are planting seeds, or we've planted a seed, and literally in the garden one plants the seed. Where you plant the seed, it doesn't spring the next day into a tomato plant and you're harvesting. No, it takes time, and it takes time even to show its face above the soil. And it's the same with us and our ideas, our journey, our healing process. It's all an opportunity, those downtimes, an opportunity to put down the roots, to allow the settling of life, the development of new ideas, new growth, and the germination to come from that. It's a really important time. One of my favorite places in the garden is the compost heap.
Yes. Yes.
It's amazing. You take all this stuff that's apparently dead, apparently at the end of its life, apparently spent. You layer it up, you take care of it, you leave it in the corner, and life bursts forth within it. The flies, the bugs, the slugs, the snails, the caterpillars, the grass snakes, if you're lucky, and it becomes a fertile soil for new life next year. So there are lots of metaphors for really this amazing experience called life, and the opportunity just connect with life in a new rhythm and a natural way.
Right. And to honor each one of the cycles in terms of, like a lot of times we look at the garden in full bloom and we think that that's the purpose of it. And that might last 2 weeks. I have these beautiful they're called surprise lilies or resurrection lilies. They're a kind of an amethyst, whatever that Christmas plant is. And the Christmas plant does it at the opposite time of the year. But the green stuff comes up and then the green stuff dies. And it looks like there's nothing there for months. Then always mine, the ones I plant, bloom on my birthday. They come up right in the first or second week of August, and then there's these beautiful pink blooms that come a little before and through and after my birthday, and then they disappear again. But they're not gone. They're under the soil eating. Like we have to eat in the winter, like we have to give ourselves times to assimilate. It's also like digestion.
And the garden is a journey. Anybody who's ever had a garden, or visited a garden, or even grown anything, may realize that it isn't about the sowing of the seed. You can't simply sow a seed, ignore it, and that's the end of it.
Wow.
The sowing of the seed, then germinates. That needs attention. The plant that comes from it needs more attention, transplanting or potting on or whatever that is. Then there's the harvesting, and then what do you do with the harvest? And the whole thing is a journey, and there's the rhythm of the garden, the wider garden, the seasons that we are blessed with in the UK for sure. But every garden, wherever it is in the world, will have its own rhythm. And the you know, I took over this garden about 3 years ago. I've got roughly 3/4 of an acre, and it was just rough grass when I arrived. I have great plans, but every time I get one part of the plan starting to manifest, another part shows itself, and then another part, and then another part. And that's like our lives. If we are continually rushing for the end, what it is, oh, I'm going to get to the end of this. When I've got that job, I'm going to be happy. When I've got that relationship, when I've got that money, when I retire, when whatever, we lose sight of the journey, of smelling the roses, of enjoying our feet rustling through the fallen leaves, of building the compost, of whatever it is.
Or discovering, one time, I keep going back to actual gardening because it is such a beautiful metaphor for things. My husband got a package of wildflower seeds, and we sprinkled it in this one area, and everything that came up was a surprise.
Yes.
Oh, look at there! Here, look at that! And the thing is, they didn't all bloom at the same time. So we have ideas, right, in our life. We have, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and we even have an idea of a sequence.
Yes.
But the organic sequence in our lives, I think this is the thing that it takes time to feel our way into,
Mm-hmm.
and to give something the time, water it, nurture it to grow. As you said, I'm going to be happy when I get this car or whatever it is. And you might be happy. And if somebody gave you the money and you got the car right away, okay, what is that? Or if you save for it and you work for it and you take time and care in how you build towards getting it, do you have a different sense of ownership?
Mm-hmm.
That's a process, and the garden is a process. And connecting to our heart and our body, that's also a process.
We are a process. Our life is a process. Our life is a journey. It's an adventure. And the more we can recognize that, what it facilitates, or what it potentially opens for us, is the ability to be present. One of the metaphors that I use is the snail.
Mm.
And if you've ever watched a snail moving along the ground, the foot feels everything, and it's totally present to everything, every lump and bump as it moves along the soil, and it's very present, as I say. And if we can become present, I mean, Eckhart Tolle talks about the power of now. In a way, it's become a bit of a cliche, but it's not. Nature is present now. In the UK, we're experiencing a heat wave, serious heat wave, something we've not experienced for a long time. In the past couple of months, I think we've had about a tablespoon of rain in our particular area of the country, and that's very, very unusual. And the nature is rushing now to develop seeds and set its seed quickly, 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 before in order to support the next generation, the next stage of germination, to get it all sorted. And nature has a way of adjusting to these things because it's present. It's present to what's going on. It's not present with any judgment of right or wrong. This is just what's being presented to it. And so how is it going to cope with this? And of course, nature always survives. It's always got an answer, which is why I love sharing about it so much.
Well, and the same thing is true with us. Another cliche, when one door closes, a window opens or something. And I remember I was going through a transition, and people said that to me, and I'm like, oh, bitch, don't be saying that again, or I'm going to knock your block off. And and then they would say something like, oh, well, you can do so many more things, you're so talented and stuff. And I was like, yeah, but I don't care about that. I wanted to do this that is coming to an end. And that year I spent some good time in the garden, and I was looking at things. Oh, in order for something new to grow, actually, in order for this one thing I want to grow, I have to thin enough space for it, which means I have to decide this is going to come out, this plant is going to come out, this seedling is going to come out, and this is the one. So this is the idea that I'm going to let grow. And even so, I could take 3 or 4 little things that had sprouted randomly and give them room and say, let me see what these are. And if I do that in my life, you say, well, I can do this, or I can do that, or I can do this. What if I give a little water to all 3 things and see which one jumps up highest? Mm-hmm. If I don't have an agenda, what's to say that this one that grew fastest isn't the one is good for me to spend more time with?
We live so often in that state of judging what's right and wrong as human beings. And if we could switch from being judgmental into a place of questioning, it's quite, it's a subtle shift. I'm not saying it's easy, but if we can shift from judging what's right and wrong, what's okay, what's not okay, into now, why has that grown there? What has happened? What could I do differently? How might this work? What would be the possibility if this was for me, what would happen? I had some free tomato seedlings grow this year in a pot. Very surprisingly, I had a parent plant that grew and died from blight last year. It's a rotting fungal disease, and you have to cut the plant down and burn it. And the pot was in the woodland. I was going to just put the soil there. You can't use it for anything else. But when I came to empty it out this spring, suddenly there's 4 or 5 little tomato plants in it. And I thought, well, that's not the right thing to have happened, because this plant was not a diseased parent plant. However, I went, well, I wonder what would happen if I took these out of this diseased soil, put them in some fresh soil, and just watered them. So I've done that, and I've kept them separate from other plants just in case there's any potential for infection. I now have plants, they're not very big, but they have very tiny tomatoes on them that are starting to go red.
Oh, like
So
little
I think
cherry? Are they little cherry tomatoes?
they are tiny cherry tomatoes. So they were cherry tomatoes, but they're even smaller than normal cherry tomatoes. So yeah.
How
Magic.
interesting. Yeah. And what a surprise. And what a fun experiment.
Yeah. Come from questioning.
Mm-hmm. And when you don't have an agenda, these 4 plants must produce X, Y, and Z. And the same thing, I think, is true in our lives. When we say, well, what is the return on investment for my time in this activity? Oh. So I go back and I say, do I want to do this activity? Is this activity fun and pleasurable for me to do? Do I learn something? Is the time I spend doing this good time? If so, then I will do it, whether it produces a monetary return on the time spent or not. And when I do that, 9 times out of 10, the return is greater. So, like if I'm weeding in the garden, the plants grow better, so I get more food. Well, it's not really money, but it's more food. Yay! Um, if I'm talking to people, I make a new friend. Okay, a new friend is how. What is the price of that? You can't put a price on that. So then that is again, what might happen from this interaction today? What could grow from it if I don't have an agenda of what and how it must grow?
We live, we often live quite transactionally. If I do this, this is going to happen. If I look at doing this, what is it going to bring me? If I do this for you, will you do this for me? It's that kind of it's in a polite world society, it's called give and take, but it's often a little bit, it's got a few strings attached often. And for me, there's something about simply being present with myself, my feeling, my heart, my what feels good. It's not quite true, because it's not only about what feels good, but i- something that feels in line with my purpose. If I'm taking it back to the garden, I'm not usually inspired to sow seeds at Christmas. Come the new year, I am. But there's a time for it. I'm not usually inspired to go out and dig the garden at this time of year. The soil is too hard. It's not the right thing. So there's a kind of a sense of the feeling of what feels right. And I think that this is partly the living, when you're living in tune with your heart, when you're living connected to your own sense of self, your own truth, then you're more able to make those kind of choices, and they bring rewards, because they bring things to you that nurture your whole self, and they are beyond the things that we can consciously comprehend sometimes. We might think, oh, this would be a good idea, or that would be a good idea, but it doesn't necessarily bring us what it is our hearts and souls would truly love. So living in a way that is more guided by what feels right. It feels a bit wishy-washy when I'm speaking it, but what happens is we open ourselves to something more than just the thinking, or I'll do this for you, you do this for me. There's a freer, becomes more like swimming in a pond, or a lake, or even in the sea.
Right. And what I think about when you say when it feels right, for me it's like a gong, and it has a resonance through me, not just a good idea, you know, not just the heart saying I want to do this. It's a boing, 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 through all the levels. This is an appropriate action for this time.
Yes.
And I think that that's one of the things, too, a metaphor about gardening is what the garden that we do. My husband has an entire rotation planned that, because where you plant the tomatoes one year, we have a soil-borne disease that gets on the tomatoes. And so he tries to move the tomatoes from year to year so that they don't go back to that same bed till 4 years. And then we plant different things in there and change, and everything you plant adds something to the soil and takes something from the soil. So even the farming where I am at, they might farm corn on a field for 3 or 4 years. Then they plant soybeans because the soybeans dump nitrogen back into the soil, and and they still get a crop.
Yes.
It's not as pretty as the corn, but it's a cycle. And then that was what was really helpful for me to looking at the cycles of things. And like you said, life, it goes up and down, and it goes around. Sometimes I look at the cycle of the moon. I mean, we try not to set any poles. Now, what did he tell me? We have to do it by Friday. Oh, it's the moon. See, I let him do all of this. But there's a certain time in the moon when if you set your pole, the ground grabs it better. And if you set it at the other time,
As the moon's descending.
yeah, the soil doesn't firm up around it, doesn't hold it as well. And then there's watering days and killing days, so that if you and days to prune to encourage growth, days to prune to discourage growth, and so then I was like, oh, life is like that thing from Ecclesiastes, right? There is a time. My garden, there is a time. And then if I say, oh, well, there's a time for each phase in my life, I can stop pushing on myself to be in a growth phase when I feel like I need to be quiet, retiring, writing, uh, reviewing, looking at things. That gives me more, going with the metaphor of the garden and growth and cycles, gives me more permission to listen to my body and its own rhythms.
And there's something that holds all of that, that it requires us to step back from our belief that the world and the universe revolves around the me, and that there is something else from which that we're all an expression of something else. And that's what I love with nature. You know, it's like it's nature is the energy, is the force from which the garden springs. And we are also an expression of nature. You can call it the universal force. Some people would call it God. Whatever that is there's a something something that stimulates the life force within us. And when we can step back from ourselves, from our, you know, our egoic, our identity driven self, and into allowing that force of nature to guide us more fully, then all sorts of magic can appear that isn't necessarily available to us otherwise. It's
So
beautiful.
when you work with people, I'm since we're friends and we talk, I know you work with these metaphors a lot, and growing with grace, that indicates to me a kindness and a generosity for the mistakes of growing too. I plant a sweet potato ornamental vine, and and I don't know, I buy the crawling one, and one year I bought the climbing one, and it was like, oh, well, it just grew differently, and I had to give it a little trellis, and it was quite pretty. It wasn't what the other one was, but if I could have been disappointed all summer.
Mhm. There
Or
are no mistakes in nature.
right,
We judge something as a mistake, but there's no mistakes. And compassion calls us to simply be compassionate with ourselves and recognize, well, that is only a mistake because I've judged it as such.
right,
Maybe it's a part of my unfolding.
right. It was supposed to happen for some unknown reason.
Well, there'll be some magic that comes from it.
Down, and whether it's a year or 2 or 5 years before you are able to recognize that, because in the unfolding of time and growing, it's an ongoing process.
And
So,
meanwhile, we need to compassion for ourselves.
yes, and acceptance for the fact that we will goof up because we
We
do.
are so human.
So this is your website flowing across the bottom where people can reach you,
It
um,
certainly is.
find out more about what you're doing, what classes you have, or how to work with you. And I thank you so much for being here and sharing your garden. And it didn't really rain on you, did it?
It did not. I had my brolly here in case, but I didn't need it.
Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We can do a little rain dance for you because I know you need rain. And perhaps just as we close, the clouds will open and shine rain down upon you. Thank you so much, Lorraine. It's been a delight.
Thank you, Laura. God bless you.
Take care.
Thank you.